everybody, and welcome to Liverpool Fashion Summit. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Patsy Perry, Reader in Fashion Marketing at Manchester Metropolitan University's Fashion Institute. Hi Patsy, welcome and thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Hi, my absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me on. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to start, if possible, by sort of to use it as a bit of a launch pad for the conversation, is a paper that you co-authored, which was published last year, titled "Behind the Runway: Extending Sustainability in Luxury Fashion Supply Chains," which was published in the Journal of Business Research. And I have to say, I was thrilled when I saw this paper, because often I find that luxury fashion gets a bit overlooked in some of the top sort of supply chain and operations management and sort of management journals more generally. So I was thrilled to see it, and I'd like to sort of use that as a springboard for the conversation, if I may. So the paper explored two luxury fashion supply chains, a fashion sort of supply chain, and then a leather goods supply chain. And you mentioned in the paper, or it was mentioned in the paper, I should say, that the high price of luxury products has protected the luxury fashion industry from environmental and social scrutiny. And this is despite some pretty poor instances of sustainability performance that you highlighted in the paper. I wondered, why exactly has the high price point offered protection to luxury brands, in your opinion?
Well, as we know, there's a lot of focus, isn't there, on fast fashion, which takes the brunt of the negative press around fashion sustainability, because I think it's quite apparent for anybody to see and to question, how can something be made for such a cheap price, that surely corners are going to be cut with regard to social and environmental responsibility. But I think the high price of luxury fashion, and also one of the reasons why some people might think, well, sustainable fashion is out of reach, is because it is expensive, isn't there? So there is that assumption then that things are going to be done well and done properly, because there is that extra profit margin in the product that you haven't got with the likes of fast fashion. So I think it has escaped some scrutiny because of that.
And why is it that you think that there have been so many instances where luxury brands have fallen short of the mark, as it were, both socially and environmentally? How has that occurred? If they do have the profit margins to sort of, what you would hope would ensure better practice, how is it the case that they are falling short in so many regards, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think a lot of what's happening in the mass market and fast fashion, the influence of fast fashion has been felt across the industry, in terms of the volume of production that's going out now for the ready-to-wear lines, and also the frequency of updated collections and the frequency of new collections going onto the market, and also the cost efficiency focus that has led to actually a lot of outsourcing. So the idea that all of these ready-to-wear lines are kind of made in the country of origin and all the fabrics are made there, that's no longer the case. And I think when you are managing, thousands of different items across so many different seasons, it begins slightly to resemble, the mass market fast fashion, doesn't it? So no longer do we have, 2 or 4 collections a year, but there is a lot more frequency. And trying to encourage consumers to buy into more frequent ranges and collections. So therefore, some of the things that we see happening in mass market and fast fashion, exploitation of labour and pollution of the environment, that can also happen equally in luxury.
So is this all sort of connected to what has been referred to as the democratization of the luxury industry? Does that have a part to play in this, the pursuit of sort of or masstige or accessible luxury, that sort of section of the market? Do you think that has been partly responsible for this?
Yes, absolutely. So much as that we might talk about democratization of fashion, making brand new clothes available to anybody regardless of their disposable income level. With fast fashion, you can update your wardrobe quite frequently. You can buy brand new clothes, not have to have hand-me-downs or second-hand. And I think the same has happened in luxury. So where luxury has tried to capture greater market share by offering accessible ranges and diffusion lines and so on. So corners are going to be cut, because the production for those, it's not going to be as high end as what you might see for the the absolute level of luxury. And most of the market is not going to be at that absolute level. So haute couture is a very small proportion of the overall market. There aren't many people in the world that can afford or are willing to purchase that type of clothing, but it's really those kind of masstige ready to wear lines that are going to generate most of the profit there.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I was just wondering, do you think that the tide is turning with this? Are we getting to a point where luxury brands can no longer sort of evade this scrutiny?
Yeah, I think so, because historically they've always been quite secretive, quite mysterious. So I think this is just part of their characteristics, that they haven't been used to sharing this sort of information as much as other brands such as your Marks and Spencers and so on. But I think increasingly there is that expectation that we want to know what brands are doing, and it's not acceptable to stay quiet anymore. So even if they are fearful of backlash or questioning about what exactly are you doing around sustainability, and citizens wanting to make sure it's not just greenwash, but I think that we will see more sharing. But again, part of that will be around business confidentiality as well. So they may not want to reveal some of the more innovative practices that they're doing, because they may not want competitors to steal an advantage that way.
That makes sense, I suppose, particularly for luxury, where innovation with design is so integral, isn't it? It's one of the key critical success factors. So that makes total sense. And just jumping back to the paper for a second, Patsy. So I noticed that one of the sort of key finding was that current energies to improve sustainable supply chain management in these supply chains that you looked at particularly, so one was fashion, one was leather, they mainly focus on reducing negative impacts generated by their operations. And so one of the sort of outcomes from the paper is that it suggests that more radical approaches are needed to extend sustainability across supply chains. What types of approaches do you think are required for us to achieve these types of goals?
I mean, one of the issues that we found, so this is just to explain, this paper was based on Dr. Hakan Karaosman's PhD research, and he's actually speaking at one of the other sessions this week on the modern slavery roundtable. So he went out and collected this data, and then we did some paper writing together. But one of the quite interesting findings was that much as what we might see in mass market and fast fashion, the extent of outsourcing of the production process, so where some of these processes would have been, everything would have been made in Italy for hundreds of years, now that's no longer the case. So kind of 60 years ago, a lot of the silk was outsourced to China for reasons of cost efficiency. So the producers that are left in Italy, they don't actually know what chemicals have been used on the fabric before it gets to them. There's no way of finding out. So I think that sort of lack of transparency, which we might assume to be better in luxury, because we might assume they have a tighter supply chain and they know everyone who's in the supply chain, and those supply chains we might assume to be kind of more local. That's not necessarily the case, because we do have that huge geographic dispersion, and they have come under cost pressure, much the same as what we'd see in the mass market. So where things would have been all made in house, the way they work with their supply chains is that they will tend to use external suppliers, but that's because of those external suppliers have the expertise in very specific components or products, but they will work with them for generations. And many of these businesses are family businesses. They've been around for generations, and they've been supplying these luxury brands for many years. I think what we found that one of the main reasons why these producers were kind of inspired to become more sustainable was because they had this real pride that they wanted to support their industry and wanted to continue to protect those jobs and those skills in that area, and they didn't want to see, further outsourcing or further loss of jobs, skills, and so on to, the outsourced global market, and also that kind of sense of pride in their own region, and keeping things as clean as possible. But I think it is more challenging because you don't always know who else is in that supply chain, because so much of it has actually been outsourced, much the same as what we see in the mass market. And there've been stories in the press, haven't there, over many years, where we've seen actually it's only the very last production function that happens in that country of origin. So you may have shoes which are largely made in Romania, but then they'll be transported into Italy for that final production stage, and then they can stamp "Made in Italy" on them. But
Yeah,
the consumer wouldn't really know, would they?
yeah, and I've seen that there's
Wouldn't
been a lot
expect
of
to find that in luxury.
no, and I know that there have been a lot of sort of controversial discussions about, protection with regards to, stricter sort of, or more clarification with regards to what, made in Italy or made in France actually means. Because like you said, there seems to be quite a lot of grey area and loopholes at the moment. I just wanted to ask, because I noticed that you're talking here really about supply chains becoming less vertically integrated within luxury, which seems to have happened obviously, naturally as the democratization of luxury has progressed. It seems like the supply chains have become less vertically integrated. Do you think that trend will continue, or is there an end point to that? And has there, we've seen things emerge like reshoring. Do you think that there might be a sort of reverse of this trend at any point, or do you think it's very much going to continue being this way for a while?
I think with the growth of production volumes, there's no way that we could see extensive reshoring, because we just wouldn't have the capacity in some of those countries of origin. So they would always need to use that outsourced global supply base. But it depends on whether we will try and build back with a smaller, more sustainable fashion industry, and really think about how much product we're putting out onto the market every year. And it's not just the likes of H&M, who are putting millions of items out on the market every year and kind of taking back only a very small proportion of that for recycling or reuse. But I think we could also look at how many collections and of what luxury brands are putting out, and especially with internationalization of retail and distribution, in terms of globalizing where they're selling into, through both physical stores but also through their online presence. So it just seems to be that we are going to see a much greater volume of product being made, and therefore realistically we're not going to be able to bring all that back into the country of origin, because we just don't have the capacity.
So in that case then, the solutions potentially for improving supply chain sustainability rely on improving transparency and supply chain visibility, therefore, would you say?
Yeah, so we will need to have much greater visibility of who's in the supply chain and what's actually happening at each stage, bearing in mind that there are no global sustainability regulations. So what happens and what's permitted in one country may be very different from what's permitted somewhere else, in terms of restricted substances that you're allowed to use for textile processing or for leather processing. What might be allowed in somewhere like China or Bangladesh may not be allowed in Europe, for example. But if those processes are made far away and you're not quite sure who's doing them, then we don't really know, do we? So I think we will need much greater transparency, because I think we're not going to move away anytime soon from these kind of globally dispersed supply chains,
And how
with
do
many
you think,
different partners in them.
sorry, Patsy, the Zoom
Sorry.
Zoom delays. I was just wondering, how do you envisage that these changes can be achieved? How can we improve supply chain visibility on this kind of scale? Because it's pretty monumental, isn't it? Even in just the luxury fashion sector alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a lot of interest around digital technology to improve visibility, and digitalization of the supply chain, enabling multiple supply chain partners to be kind of using a real-time system that everyone has access to one version of the truth. So I think that could be one way of doing it. There's interest also around, AI in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of demand sensing. And it's not only, the mass market that really needs to think about overproduction and waste, but also, luxury. So which are the products that are going to sell really well, to hopefully then reduce the amount of markdowns at the end of the season, or things that, don't ever really sell. But how can we be better able to predict what the market wants closer to the time of the market demand happening?
Can I just jump in
And
there,
also,
Patsy? Sorry, can I just jump in, because that's quite an interesting point, because you talk about the prediction of demand, but luxury fashion notoriously, I remember seeing an interview with Bernard Arnault from LVMH, who famously said he didn't believe in market research. Do you think then, because of sustainability, we might see a shift away from luxury feeling like it dictates the demand, and might it have to sort of move towards demand driven models a bit more if they want to achieve these kinds of sustainability objectives?
yeah, I think so. And, we have to realise that, in the olden days, we might have said the trends would trickle down from luxury and be copied by high street and fast fashion. But I think that's no longer the case. And we see trickle up effect as well. So trends coming from celebrities, social media influencers, streetwear, music artists, and so on. And we see luxury collaborating with hip hop artists with streetwear brands. So it's not the case that these luxury brands kind of sit in this ivory tower and dictate the trends, but they are more following the market, I think, than ever before, especially with the expansion of masstige and diffusion ranges. So perhaps not the couture, of course, and those kind of higher absolute levels of luxury, but in those lower accessible areas of luxury, which has seen a lot of market growth and has potential for further international expansion, then they will be more market led by definition.
That's really interesting. So we're talking about here like a sort of more division of the market and the requirements for the different sort of, we often talk about the pyramid, don't we, with luxury fashion. And so what you seem to be suggesting is that obviously it's very important that at the top of that pyramid, creativity doesn't get compromised, which is, that's why it's never traditionally been driven by by the market demand. It's always sort of led the way. But it's really fascinating. I could talk about that side of things alone for hours
Yeah.
on end with you. Yeah. So are there any particular technologies that are emerging that you're particularly excited about, or that show promise for improving sustainability?
I think a really interesting area when we're thinking about reducing the amount of physical goods that are produced, and the wastage that goes with that, is really going back and thinking, what is the purpose of a garment, and what is the garment going to be used for, and do we always need the physical version of that garment? So I think it's really exciting to see developments that are happening around digital fashion or digital skins, which is fashion that is only ever designed to be worn in a virtual world. And I think particularly relevant as we've all been spending so much time at home, on Zoom and so on. So I think that could be an area for growth as well. And I think even when we do come out of the pandemic, it still might be an interesting area, because so many, especially the younger generation, you have your physical life, but often you also have a second virtual life, don't you, with all the social media platforms that you might engage in, whether you're participating in any kind of virtual worlds and so on. So that demands a whole different understanding of fashion.
It's going
and
to be
therefore the resources that go into producing things that are going to be worn once for a selfie or whatever, there's arguably no reason to go through that whole extensive supply chain of manufacturing and transportation, but we could just develop greater variety of digital skins.
I love that idea. I think it's infinitely fascinating, and I'm very excited to see how all of this is going to develop. I mean, even in the last few weeks, we've seen a lot of interesting articles about, Gucci with the virtual trainers, and the potential of, non-fungible tokens and
Yeah.
virtual collections and things like that. But the one thing that I was particularly interested in, which I read, I'm not sure if you've read about this online, is how you'd effectively still buy a physical product, but that it would come with almost like a digital twin, which you could then take forward with you into your virtual worlds as well. It just kind of
Even better. And
blows the mind,
it never
really.
wears out, does it? So it always looks the same as brand new on the day that you bought it. So I think there is could be great appeal in those.
But do you think that sort of thing is going to compromise notions that have typically been associated with luxury, such as exclusivity and things like that? Or do you think actually, because of the sort of non-fungible token element of it, it will maintain that exclusivity?
Yeah, I think it could still be exclusive, couldn't it? So it could also be limited edition. You would have the provenance, and yes, you might see counterfeit, copycat items, but that's been part of the course anyway, hasn't it, with luxury throughout the passage of time. So I think there's no reason why you couldn't retain the exclusivity around these digital skins.
Fascinating. I'm very, very excited to see how this develops over the coming years. Just Patsy, thank you very much for being so generous with your time. A couple of final questions. I wondered how how do you think sustainable supply chain management will progress in the luxury fashion sector in the next few years?
I think it's going to only get better. So we'll see more efforts and more innovation and initiatives around improving sustainability. And I think it's really interesting in terms of the jobs market and opportunities for careers in those areas, both on the social responsibility side as well as the environmental responsibility, which require very different skill sets. And I think the other point to think about is that it's not just the big luxury groups, but there's lots of smaller emerging designers, not only in the West but also across the world. We need to think about how might they approach sustainability. So I think sometimes sustainability is used almost as a buzzword or a marketing term, but there are many designers that are working with sustainable practices that might not sort of badge themselves as a sustainable luxury designer. But it's about kind of looking beyond that kind of dominant Western luxury model and trying to understand what other innovations are happening around the world. Because I think when we look further around the world into different countries and cultures, we might find that actually they have a long history across many centuries of engaging with sustainable practices in one form or another, although they may not be called that.
That's interesting. And I guess it leads me on to really my sort of final question, which as we see sort of sustainability becoming more integrated in the luxury fashion sector, do you think it will change the way that we perceive luxury? And I guess ultimately, do you think that sustainability is a compatible or incompatible concept with luxury fashion, with the notion of luxury, I suppose?
I think it is compatible because I think the notion of luxury is that it should be, the best, and it should be respectful of people and environment, and it should not, ravage people and environment in its manufacture. But then the idea of fashion, ever changing, constantly, the only constant is change, isn't it? So I think luxury has the idea that it's meant to be long lasting and to be kept and treasured and so on, but fashion is meant to be perhaps discarded more frequently and updated. So I think that's an interesting dilemma to unpack.
So in that case, then, do you think? Because obviously we've spoken a lot about how there's the pyramid, the democratization of luxury. Do you think that through sustainability there is the opportunity for those who uphold the critical success factors more closely aligned with the sort of top of the pyramid, as it were, to redefine luxury in a sense?
Yeah, we could be. Absolutely. I think in recent times, a lot of luxury brands have been looking to expand the customer base and targeting millennials and targeting other large populated countries. So not just Western consumer, because those markets are pretty saturated right now. But again, how they target, for example, Chinese millennials, it's a very different way, isn't it? But I think there's also an opportunity for offering, what we might call permanent collections. So not this ever-changing, frequently updated collections, but something that has some constancy. So the idea that less is more. I think we're all overwhelmed with the amount of choice in the marketplace, and that's the case not only for fast fashion, mass market, but also for luxury. How do you even ever choose? And can you actually wear something that you bought last season? So I think there's possibly some opportunities around offering smaller, edited, more sort of permanent collections that maybe don't go out of style. But again, that sort of conflicts with our very notion of fashion, which is about constant change, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because in many ways I see like a overlap between luxury or some elements of luxury fashion and the slow fashion movement, for example. I mean, you mentioned there about sort of,
Yeah.
quality and permanent collections. I'd not heard that term before, and I really like that idea, and I've been involved in luxury brands, as you know, and we always used to talk about making pieces that would be in somebody's wardrobe for a lifetime. And that was a very important part of the ethos of the brand that I was involved with. So it'd be interesting to see
Yeah.
because that really does conflict with the other side of the industry, which is 6 collections a year, cruise collections, all
Yeah.
of these things. It does jar, doesn't it? There's a disconnect there. It'll be interesting to see how it
Yeah,
will
you're kind of
unfold.
pulled in both directions, aren't you? Because to increase profits, you need to sell more stuff. So I don't think we've really got a handle yet on how we can build business models that are not essentially based around selling more items and market growth by selling more stuff to more people.
Yeah,
So that's the real
100%.
conundrum.
Well, that will be the big challenge for the coming years, and it's going to be very interesting to see how it unfolds. I think that's probably a good place to leave it there. But once again, thank you so much. And I would urge everybody who's watched this to go and check out Patsy's work on her profile at MMU. And also, please check out the Journal of Fashion Marketing and Management, of which Patsy is an associate editor. It's got lots of great things on there. So if you're interested in fashion, please do go and check that out. Patsy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my pleasure. Nice talking to you.